You've heard stories of Roman soldiers conquering nations, but what if I told you most never feared battle at all? Because by the time they reached the battlefield, they were already broken. Not by swords, not by enemies, but by their own training. Before a Roman legionary ever faced an opponent, he marched 12 miles before sunrise, carrying more weight than most men could lift. He fought wooden dummies until his arms went numb. He slept on the ground, ate boiled grain, and obeyed orders so strict that speaking out of turn could earn a beating. So tonight, don't imagine the glory of Roman warfare. Imagine the routine that forged those warriors long before war ever did. Because once you hear what their daily training was like, you'll realize battle was the easy part. You might think that the terror of being a Roman soldier came from the clash of steel on the battlefield, from the roar of charging barbarians, or from the thunder of cavalry hooves bearing down in the mist. But the truth is quieter, more monotonous, and far more exhausting. For most Roman legionaries, the enemy was not the Gaul or the Parthian or the Germanic tribesmen. The first and greatest enemy was the training ground itself. Before any soldier saw real battle, he was already ground down by discipline, by routine, and by endless repetition of movements that stripped away individuality and replaced it with unity. Rome did not merely arm men. It reshaped them. And if you had been standing there at sunrise in a dusty training field outside one of the empire's many fortified camps, you would have realized that surviving war was not the primary challenge. Surviving preparation was. The day began before the sun was fully visible. There were no trumpets to wake you, only the barked order of a centurion or optio walking between rows of recruits, kicking at cloaks and prodding anyone too slow to rise. Legionaries slept on hard ground, beneath woolen blankets called sagum. There were no pillows, no beds. Comfort was not a Roman military concern. You did not yawn. You did not stretch lazily. You sprang to your feet, or else the vine staff of the centurion corrected your timing. Discipline came before breath. Before you even had a chance to eat, you were placed into formation, shoulder to shoulder with other recruits, farmers and blacksmiths, freedmen and peasants, men who had joined willingly or been pushed into service by poverty or punishment. Some looked confident, others afraid, but all kept silent. The Roman army had no tolerance for unnecessary speech. The first order of the day was not combat training, but marching. To be a legionary was to walk great distances with great weight. Each man was expected to carry around 30 kilograms of equipment, a wooden framed pack called a furca, containing spare clothing, tools, rations of hardtack and salted meat, a cooking pot, and a mess kit. Then came his weapons, a gladius sword, a pugio dagger, and 2 pila, long-throwing javelins with iron points designed to bend upon impact. Add to that the massive rectangular scutum shield, curved to wrap around the body and heavy enough to double as a battering ram in formation. You might think training would begin slowly, to let new recruits adjust. It did not. The first command was always the same, a forced march. Not at walking pace, but at quick step, the military jog that Roman soldiers maintained for miles on end. 8 Roman miles was the standard morning warm-up. Each Roman mile was roughly 1,480 meters, so 8 miles meant nearly 12 kilometers. Before breakfast, the ground varied. Sometimes gravel, which tore at exposed ankles and solace. Sometimes packed dirt, which became slick with dew. Sometimes cobbled roads, which sent vibrations through shins and knees until every stride felt like an impact against stone. Recruits were not allowed to fall behind. If one stumbled, he was punished later. If he collapsed entirely, the march did not stop. Either he found the strength to catch up, or he was left to face the wrath of the centurions. Rome did not coddle its warriors. The harshness was deliberate. A soldier who could not endure training would only be a liability in battle. Only when the sun was firmly above the horizon were soldiers permitted to return to camp for their first meal. Food was simple: a porridge of ground barley or wheat, thick like paste. Perhaps a chunk of cheese, or a strip of dried pork if supplies were generous. Oil or honey might be mixed in to soften the taste, though most Roman soldiers swallowed their meals quickly, more concerned with filling their stomachs than enjoying flavor. There were no spoons provided. Fingers were enough. Eating was quiet and quick. Any man who lingered risked losing time for rest before the next drill. Combat training followed, and this was where Roman soldiers were truly broken and rebuilt. It would be natural to expect that recruits used their real swords and shields. But Rome believed that training should be harder than war, so wooden weapons were made to be twice the weight of real ones. The gladius rudis, a solid wooden blade, was heavy and unbalanced. The training shield was reinforced with metal to drag on the arm. Recruits lined up before wooden posts set into the ground, each one shaped roughly like a man. These were called pali, and they were treated as enemies. There were no fluid duels or heroic clashes. There was only rhythm. Thrust, withdraw. Slash left, slash right. Shield forward, shield back, repeat. Hundreds of times. Then thousands. The centurion did not count for you. You simply continued until told to stop, and the order rarely came before your arms began to feel like molten iron. Some cried out from effort. That was acceptable. Complaining or stopping was not. If a man faltered, his punishment was immediate. Extra drills, or a flogging, or being made to stand apart from the line as an example of weakness. Rome did not believe in sparing feelings. It believed in forging reliability. After weapons practice came formation drills. Here, the individuality of recruits was stripped away entirely. You were not a man. You were a unit, a living piece of a grid. Roman formations were precise, calculated down to the inch. Each soldier learned to align his shoulder with the man beside him and his shield with the man in front. When ordered to advance, they did not step forward individually. They moved as one. Shields overlapped to become walls. Spears angled outward like bristling hedgehogs. The famous testudo, or tortoise formation, was practiced endlessly, men forming a roof of shields over their heads while those on the outside locked shields at the front and sides. Under the sun, inside that shielded box, heat grew unbearable. Sweat dripped from brows, soaked tunics, pooled beneath sandals. But no one moved. The command to hold was absolute. Sometimes rocks were thrown at them by higher officers to simulate enemy projectiles. Not small pebbles, but fist-sized stones that could crack ribs or fingers. You were expected to absorb impact without flinching. Better to bruise in training than bleed in battle, Rome said. And Rome was not wrong. But understanding that fact did not make the pain any less sharp. Beyond this, recruits also learned construction. A Roman soldier was not merely a fighter. He was an engineer, a carpenter, a digger, and a laborer. Each evening, after hours of marching and fighting drills, soldiers were required to build their own camp. Trenches were dug, stakes hammered in, defensive ramparts raised. Every night, no matter how far they had traveled, they constructed a protective fort as if expecting attack. And sometimes they were attacked, making the labor feel justified. But most nights were quiet, and still they built. Because Rome demanded routine. Routine created readiness. Readiness prevented death. Punishment awaited any soldier who neglected duties. For small offenses, lateness, sloppiness, speaking out of turn, there were floggings. The vine stick, called vitus, was the symbol of a centurion's authority, and it was not ceremonial. For greater offenses, theft, cowardice, insubordination, punishment escalated. A soldier could be stripped of rank, pay, or even citizenship. But the most feared penalty was decimation. This was rare, but its rarity made it more terrifying. If a unit showed cowardice or disobedience, it was divided into groups of 10. One man from each group was chosen by lot and beaten to death by the other 9. Those spared did not celebrate. They were forced to live with the knowledge that their survival had been bought with blood, and that next time, the lot might fall differently. Evenings were not for leisure. After construction duties and meal distribution, soldiers were sometimes taught swimming, wrestling, or mock cavalry maneuvers. Not for sport, but for conditioning. Armor had to be cleaned, weapons sharpened, boots repaired. Every item had to be ready for immediate departure. No soldier owned luxury. No soldier had privacy. They slept in groups of 8 in leather tents called contubernia. They shared tools, cooked meals in rotation, and maintained absolute cooperation. Bonding was not encouraged. It was enforced. You lived or died with the 7 other men in your tent. If one fell in battle, the others closed ranks around his memory. If one deserted, the others bore the shame equally. Night brought little peace. A soldier could be assigned sentry duty, standing on ramparts with a spear in hand, staring into darkness, listening for distant sounds. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams were filled less with visions of war than with echoes of orders. March, lift, strike, hold, repeat. Weeks passed, then months. Recruits who had entered camp with softness in their cheeks now bore rough stubble and hardened expressions. Their backs straightened. Their voices deepened from chanting drill responses. Scars formed on hands from splintered weapons. Muscles thickened. Feet toughened. Some broke under strain and were cast out. Some deserted, only to be hunted. But most endured. Not because they loved war, but because training had left them with only one identity, legionary. By the time real battle arrived, many recruits felt oddly calm. The chaos of war was in some ways less structured than the perfection demanded by training. In battle, mistakes could be forgiven by circumstance. In training, mistakes were punished instantly. In war, death came quickly and ended pain. In training, pain was prolonged as a lesson. It is said that when a Roman legion marched onto a battlefield, their enemies often trembled not because of numbers or armor, but because of their silence. Other armies shouted and roared. The Romans advanced without sound. A quiet wall of shields and iron, every man moving at the same pace. Every spear thrust at the same moment. Every shield lifted with identical timing. They looked less like an army and more like a machine. That machine had been built through monotony, forged through exhaustion, and perfected through suffering. No empire in history maintained dominance so long without relying primarily on individual heroism. Rome relied on system, and that system was brutal. So when you imagine a Roman legionary standing on the battlefield, staring at the enemy through the slit of his helmet, understand this: the battle before him was not his first test. It was his reward. He had already survived the greater challenge, the endless days beneath the sun, the drilling until his arms went numb, the marshes until his bones rang with pain, the discipline that erased fear by replacing it with obedience. War would come, but by then, he was already unbreakable. And if you reading or listening now, imagine yourself in his sandals, lifting that shield, gripping that heavy wooden sword. Standing in formation as sweat drips into your eyes, ask yourself quietly, would you have survived long enough to reach the battlefield at all? If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Somewhere out there, you chose to spend your quiet time with quiet, boring sleep. And I'm genuinely glad you did. If this little journey through history helped you relax, unwind, or drift off just a bit easier, that means I've done my job. I'll be here again with more slow, soothing tales from the past. So if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please tap like and subscribe to Quiet Boring Sleep. Until next time, sleep well, stay curious, and may your dreams be slightly historical, but never too exciting.